All right, Isaiah. Hey, how's everybody going? Today we are here on our Facebook investors group, and today we've got Zach Goodman with Milk Creek Commercial joining us, and he's going to do a deep dive with us into the 1031 exchange. So we got a lot of buyers out there looking to invest in Ohio, but we also have some sellers, and we don't want to forget about them. We want to talk about creating an exit strategy if you're thinking about selling an investment property here soon or even down the road. It's never too soon to start educating yourself on what are the best strategies to sell that property and pay the least amount of tax, because ultimately it's not about what you make, it's about what you keep. And Zach is going to be our subject matter expert today. So welcome Scott and Frank on the call as well. And Zach, we're going to just start off with a high-level overview question of what exactly is a 1031 exchange and how does it work?
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me, Blaze. So the 1031 exchange is basically a tax loophole. It allows you to, so when you sell one investment property, it allows you to defer the taxes that you would normally pay if you buy a new replacement property. So there's plenty of rules that we'll talk about, but you defer the taxes. Most of my clients like to swap till they drop, so they never have to pay taxes, but that's not as common.
Swap till you drop. I like that.
Swap till you drop. That's a new one. I have not heard that one before. So if when you say pay taxes, what type of taxes are we talking about that we run into when we sell an investment property?
Yeah, probably the biggest is going to be your capital gains tax. So, you bought the property in the 80s, 40 years ago, and it's appreciated quite a bit since then. So the government wants their piece of that appreciation. Depreciation recapture tax is also a common one, usually not as big, but if you've held the property for a while, you're going to be looking at between 30 and 40% of the proceeds going to the government through taxes.
So 30 to 40%, that's a big chunk.
It's hefty, yeah.
So if you're looking at depreciation and appreciation, the depreciation side of things, does the 1031 exchange help with that also, or only the appreciation?
For both. Both of them can be deferred. Yep.
Nice. Okay, so swap till you drop. I love that. Let's see here. Are there any specific requirements that are in place to do a 1031 exchange other than owning an investment property? What details do we need to be aware of?
Yeah, the IRS is pretty strict. Probably the most important requirement to know is the timeline. So the day you sell, that's day one, and you have 180 days total to get into your new property. If you're not in a new property by day 180, the IRS is not going to count it, and you're going to end up paying taxes. So you also have 45 days to identify your property. And then I guess 135 after that. So 180 total, but you really need to know that 45-day deadline to identify your replacement property.
Are there any cushions on that? Like if you're at day 178 and you're not going to make it, is there a way to get a little extension or anything?
Not really. So if it's a disaster area, so if the government declares your area a disaster, then you get some leeway and they extend your deadline.
Oh, well,
that's really the only one I could think of. Exactly.
Hey,
yeah, I think Los Angeles is still a disaster area right now.
Oh yeah. Hey, I got a question on that day one. Is that the day that title transfers, or is that the day that you get a contract on that property?
That's the day title transfers.
Okay.
Good question.
So in reality, somebody could get a buyer on their property and say, okay, it's subject to me picking out my next property first.
Exactly.
But it's a really critical timeline, because 45 days to identify another property, especially in this market, can be quite challenging. And you may have to grab another property that you don't necessarily want to fulfill this need if that's what you're shooting for. So prior planning prevents poor performance is what goes on.
100%. 100%.
What about Okay, scenario wise, I get a contract on my house and I hold off the closing. And I pick another house and I get a contract on it, then I close on my house. Can that house still be the 45 days, or do I have to contract on it after I close on my house?
I believe that it still counts.
Okay.
But so qualified intermediaries are the professionals that would be handling that. I think you should double check with them, but I believe that it would still count.
Okay. Because I conceivably like to get my home inspection and know that I'm going forward with that house.
Exactly. And you're right on track. I mean, that's savvy investors. That's what they're thinking. They already have their new property in mind if they're doing the exchange.
Do you always have to level up with properties, or can you buy, if I'm selling one property that's valued at $1 million, can I buy two $500,000 properties, or do I always have to level up?
So you can buy two $500,000 properties, but the new properties must be greater value than your old property. So for example, if you have $1 million, you can't transfer into a $300,000 property. The 700 would be subject to taxes. So you can transfer into two $500,000 properties or into a $2 million property and leverage up, but the entire proceeds have to be applied.
So kind of equal or greater is what we're shooting for then.
Exactly. Yeah.
Is that the actual selling price or the appraised value?
Selling price.
So if you did, I mean, we were saying equal or greater, but let's use that as an example. If I had $1 million property I sold and I buy a $300,000 property, does that save me from paying taxes on the $300,000, or I just can't do it at all?
It would save you on the 300,000, but
Okay.
the 700,000 would still be liable. Yeah.
Okay, so when we're setting up a search for somebody, if I'm selling $1 million property and I find one for $950, I'm only unsecured paying taxes on $50,000 because I didn't match. But if I go over $1 million, I saved on all those taxes and I'm buying that new property. Perfect.
Yep, you got it.
Okay. Do you guys have any other questions, Scott or Frank, on that? Okay, so how does the capital gains deferment work in the 1031 exchange? Is there are there certain rules with that we get into?
Yes. So say my property was 300,000 when I bought it. Now it's worth $1 million. So that 700,000 is the appreciation, right? And so when I buy into a new property, I just defer all of it. You just defer all of it. Don't have to worry about it. Then if you buy into a new property, you defer it all again. Where you start running into trouble is if you've done the exchange 4 times using the same proceeds over and over. If you don't exchange the 5th time, then you're going to have to pay the taxes on all your properties going back. So you really want to plan it.
This is why it's so important to say. I mean, if you're going to buy an investment property, if you're going to buy it, you better be understanding this process before you buy it, because this is really where money is made on all
exactly.
of this. Is kicking that can down the road, or I like you're saying, swap till you drop.
Yeah.
Let's explain that, because that's what a lot of people don't understand. When you're an investor, you can exchange 4 or 5 times, never end up paying that tax. What happens when you die? Does your estate end up having to deal with all that?
When you drop, Blaze, it's not
when you drop.
drop.
Yeah, your estate will pay for it. Most of my clients, and when I say most, I can't think of a single one who didn't do this. So I'll say all my clients use the family trust. So if the family trust owns the properties, when they die, all of those properties take a step up in basis, and then the heirs or the executor, I guess, can do what they want with them. So they can sell them, not pay taxes on it, or they can hang on to them, and they would only have to worry about the appreciation that's happened since the transfer of ownership.
So when you pass, it pretty much wipes the slate clean at that point for any of your heirs.
Exactly.
Wow.
If you're worrying about, building a legacy, leaving something for your kids, this is the way to do it.
Okay. So 1031 exchange is one of those things that if you're an investor out there, you have one property or you have 100 properties, it's really the process you should be looking into to sell. But don't wait till the point where you've already listed or you're already on the market to start talking 1031 exchange, because there's a lot of planning that goes into this. Here's a question that pops right into my mind. Is there a minimum amount that makes it worth it? Like if you had a property that was a duplex, it's 100,000. Is it worth even thinking about a 1031 exchange, or do I need to be dealing with like $1 million property before this really becomes worthwhile?
Yeah, legally there's no limit. So a duplex, I think, would be perfect. Now, you're going to have to do the math on it and talk to your CPA. So the qualified intermediary, the person who receives the funds and then buys the new property in your name, they're going to charge about $1,000. So that's something to think about. So really, there's not an easy answer. I think talk to your CPA, talk to your intermediary, and do the math for yourself. For my clients, I usually say about 100,000. If it's less than that, make sure you do your math. If it's over 100,000, it's probably a good idea.
Is that $1,000 that you're talking about? Is that dependent upon how much money we're talking about, or is that just a flat fee?
It's usually a flat fee.
What are the typical costs associated with doing the 1031 exchange?
So that the qualified intermediary. Sorry, can I take a step back and maybe explain the process a little more?
Yeah, please.
So say I want to buy a property from Blaze. I've got my fourplex. It's worth $1 million. So what I'm going to do is, before I start talking about selling my property, I need to find someone known as a qualified intermediary. There's an association. This is what they do. But basically, I talk to them, and they're the ones that help me figure out the whole exchange. So when I sell my property, they receive the proceeds, not me. And when I buy Blaze's property, they're buying it in my name. If the proceeds ever touch an account that I own, kills it. IRS won't accept it. So the qualified intermediary, they're going to charge about $1,000 for that service. And then of course there's, the closing costs associated with selling my property, buying Blaze's property. Those are usually part of the whole, of the transaction. So if I sell my property for $1 million, even if I paid, $40,000 in closing costs, I still need to replace $1 million worth of property.
Okay, interesting. What are some potential risks that you run into with a 1031 exchange?
Yeah, I think the biggest risk is just not knowing what you're doing, trying to do it by yourself. So how that would turn out, the 180 days that we talk about, if you don't hit those deadlines, you're donezo. If it touches your accounts, also won't accept it. So the qualified intermediary needs to be there the whole way. So if I fill out the closing papers and I tell them to send it to my account, there's nothing you can do. I think those are probably the two biggest that I run into.
Now, I'm not sure if you know the answer to this question or not, but I've read a little bit about dealing with, if you get to a certain point in the 1031 exchange process, you got 180 days, but you get to your limit on the deadlines. Can you buy into a fund that's a 1031 exchange to kind of park your money for a while and then do another 1031 exchange to buy another property?
Yeah, you can. So REITs do not count. They're technically a security. And then 1031s are only for property. But DSTs would count. I don't sell DSTs, so I don't know much about their specific rules, but I know people that do that. And then that's actually where I can come in too. I have a fund that we sell tenant in common ownership, and you can park it with me for a couple of years and sell as well. So you can do that.
Is there a minimum time that you have to park it into that fund before you can reinitiate?
Process? So for me, there's not. For DSTs, there might be, but I'm not as familiar with those. So that would be, you'd have to talk to the sponsor.
What does DST stand for?
Yeah, it's a Delaware Statutory Trust.
That's what I was.
Yeah, so you buy into a fund and you own the property together.
Okay. So What happens ultimately, though, if I don't find the suitable replacement for this 1031 exchange? I can either buy into one of these to park my money to save it later, but what if I don't find one? What happens at that point?
Yeah, then you need to set aside some money to pay taxes next year. You'll have the cash, and
Let's
you
go
can still
back
buy
to,
into a property if you want, but you can't defer all the taxes.
let's go back to the fund for a minute. So
Yeah.
I park my money in your fund. Am I earning any kind of appreciation or interest in that fund?
Yeah, so with my properties, you own the property, so you receive rent every month. It's already leased up. They do appreciate. However, if it's only going to be for a year or so, it's probably not
Fair.
worth worrying about that. But you will be receiving your rent every month.
Okay, and then when I'm ready to move on and buy another property, just like, so that kind of takes care of that whole timeline.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, can I take a second, kind of maybe explain a little bit more about what I do? And then the
Yeah.
context would probably. So the fund I work for, we buy properties and then we sell pieces of the properties. So the idea is, most people can't afford a $10 million medical facility, but they can afford, $500,000 worth. And so I buy pizzas and sell the slices. That's how I make money.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. And
That's awesome.
yes. So for example, I have a medical property right now. If you had $1 million you're trying to place, you could buy a tenth of my medical property. Then you would receive, a tenth of the rent every month, and the deed would say you own a tenth of this property. And then yeah, you can sell it if you like. You can give it to your kids. It's real estate. So
Okay.
Wow, that's
anyway,
awesome.
hopefully that kind of explains more my role in all of this.
And that's Mill Creek Commercial.
Correct. Yeah.
So Mill Creek Commercial is buying investment properties and then letting other people buy into that fund.
Correct.
Okay.
So I'm trying to formulate this question, like,
Yeah.
you have like a list of properties that people are choosing to buy into, or they're just buying into a fund and assigned to a property?
Yeah. So they buy the property themselves. So the fund already owns the properties. And so then you come to me and you're like, hey, I'm looking for a 5 cap, a 6 cap. I'm looking for retail, medical, whatever. And I usually have about 10 properties at a time, and we can talk about each of them and what the rents are paying and what the tenants look like. But then, yeah, you'd be buying a portion of that property. And then your deed would say, Blaze owns 10% of the Dollar Tree on whatever road. And eventually the fund, our interest is going to be completely gone. We'll have sold all of it.
What's minimum investment into the fund?
So we use a tenant in common agreement for the fractional ownership. IRS limits it to 35 owners. So minimum would be a 35th of the property. But I usually say about 100,000.
Okay.
Who's managing these properties? Is it Mill Creek Commercial, or how does the property get managed?
Yeah, so they're all triple net leased. So Family Dollar Tree is responsible for paying insurance, maintenance, taxes. So there's not actually a lot of managing going on, but we do have a third party lease administrator. And basically all she does is she gets the big check every month and divides it among the owners. And she takes 2%.
Gotcha. Okay.
Hmm.
All right. Other than what you just described, is there anything else that you're doing for investors that you want to kind of use a few minutes to describe?
Yeah, thanks. So earlier we were talking about if you sell $1 million property and buy a 950 property, you'd have $50,000 left over. And in the industry, we refer to that as boot. So boot's just the leftover, and that's an area where I can really help. If you've got 100,000 or 50,000 or $200,000 left over, you can't buy another property for that much. But that's enough to get into one of my properties. And so we really hope that you won't end up spending money on any taxes. You won't end up paying any taxes because we can take probably, your entire proceeds. So that's just a little plug. we can sell fast and we can sell any amount. So if you're on, day 44 and you haven't identified, we can take it. Or if you've got, $100,000 left over, we can take it, which that's kind of what makes us, that is what makes us unique.
Wow.
Okay.
So if I bought into this fund, is there a certain amount of time that I'm staying in it? And if I need to get that money out to buy another property that I come across, is there a time limit on how quickly I can get that money out?
Yeah, there's no written rules about that. It's just real estate. I mean, so it's about as liquid as anything. So it's
Okay.
about as liquid as if you buy a Family Dollar Tree, finding someone to buy your portion.
Yeah.
But we don't have any rules about how long you have to hold it or anything like
Well,
that. It's up
that's
to
the
you.
thing, though. If we decide to set, let's say we've got a 1/35th share of Family Dollar Tree, and we decide we want our cash out to go into another investment. Now, we're dependent on somebody coming to you that wants to invest in that Family Dollar Tree, correct?
More or less.
Okay.
I would probably, the first step when you want to sell is we'd go to the other owners and say, hey, we've got a $50,000 stake. Anyone want to pick it up? And if not, we would list it, or you could list it yourself, but we're probably the best person to list fractional.
Can we go to your website and see the listings of what's available?
Yeah, you can. millcreekcommercial.com.
Okay.
So why don't you send us that link when we are done here, so that we can put it into the chat section of the video.
Yeah, good idea.
And that way our other investors can have a direct link to it as well. But other than that, I mean, a lot of times we take 30 minutes to go into this. We did it in 21, and I think you gave us a lot of great information that our investors are going to be able to utilize. I can think of one right now that I'm probably going to be calling later on this afternoon to say, hey, we need to be thinking about this and get his wheels turning so that he can start planning. So I appreciate your time, Zach. That was great information. Is there anything else, Frank or Scott, that you guys want to ask?
Keep the snow where you're at, Zach.
Absolutely.
Will do, I guess.
All right. Thank you, Zach, for joining us
Thanks,
today.
Zach.
And go
Thank
ahead and
you.
shut it down, Isaiah. Oh,